Hi, welcome to Silicon Economics. I'm your host, Rob Soderberry, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Adarsh Kannan, and we are really excited to offer this episode for you.
This episode, we're joined by a fascinating visual and AI artist, Vanessa Rosa. It's a really interesting topic. So many of us in tech are spending our time and about the impacts of AI and technology, but it's the same impact in every domain, the arts, the sciences, and in the world. And it's amazing to hear Vanessa talk about what's happening in her world and just the sheer creative output coming out of what she is doing.
Yeah, and we've, I think, discussed a lot about how a strong movement of zero marginal cost of software development is beginning to happen, with computing becoming cheaper and people are able to create code with ease. Now, the question is, how does that percolate into the rest of the economy and really into the art economy, where, let's say, an artist is now empowered to go create a whole digital world just by sitting at their desktop? What happens, right? Like, how do they then take that and make it part of their own world? I think that's the story we'll hear today.
Now, most of you listen to us, I'm sure, on a podcast, but this might be one where you want to go to YouTube, or at least maybe come back to YouTube, and we'll post a bunch of Vanessa's amazing work there.
With that, let's jump right in.
Well, I am so excited to welcome Vanessa Rosa to the show. Vanessa, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I thought I was thinking about themes of the show, and I thought, worlds colliding. It was a good metaphorical theme because first, Adarsh and I tend to work in a pretty rectilinear world of technology versus your background as an artist, and also I think maybe it's a bit of a theme of what you actually do in your art. So maybe you could give us an introduction to who you are and what you do.
Of course. So, my name is Vanessa Rosa. I'm a Brazilian visual artist. I grew up in Rio de Janeiro. And I started my art career actually really early. When I was 10 years old, I was illustrating books for my mom. So, my mom became a writer when I was a kid by educating my sister and I, and everything's a long story, but we went from doing everything very, very simple, just home based, to finally she got published for the first time by a small publisher when I was 13, 2003. Then we created our own publishing company. She started selling books online through MySpace and then Lulu and Facebook and Twitter. And eventually we created a company that published several other authors, and I became an illustrator and hired my friends to be illustrators as well, and published several books as an author. And nowadays, it's like I would say it's a quite established company in the Brazilian market. We even sell international rights. My mom's books have sold to China and South
Oh,
Korea. And on the side, I had this life as a visual artist. So I was doing art shows with oil paintings since I was a teen. And then I discovered street art. Street art was booming in my city, in my hometown. And I got involved in it, doing projects that were merging oral history. I was painting people that could have lived in the places where I was painting them. So I was thinking about the multiple layers of an old town. Rio de Janeiro is a city that has more than 500 years. And if you think the indigenous occupation is much, much older. So it's a city with many layers. And it's a city also very symbolic for the image of Brazil. And I went from doing street art paintings to working with NGOs and working with groups of people that were contesting the urban reforms for the Olympic Games, because the reforms were raising the black history of the port of Rio de Janeiro. And from that to participating in festivals and international residencies. But then I learned about laser cutting, and I was fascinated with stencils. I like to merge techniques. So laser cutting is what got me into hacker spaces, because I was doing stencils that gave the impression of optical illusions, and I started making Portuguese styles But from Portuguese styles, I started studying Islamic art because there is this historical connection between Portugal started creating tiles because of southern Spain, so the Islamic tradition, and there was so much cultural mix between Portugal and the Islamic world. But then the blue and white actually comes from China. It was the blue and white porcelain being exported all over the world that changed even the production in China. When they started doing motifs for Europe. And in Brazil, we have a lot of these blue and white tiles that we call them Portuguese. But turns out when you go deeper, you realize there is a whole story. And I just enjoy doing that. I start with something and I want to learn more and understand how this connects to everything else. So I ended up involved with hacker spaces and generative art and studying ethnomathematics and relationship of mathematics and culture and algorithms throughout history and pattern making throughout history. And that's what led me eventually to meet Gene, who is my partner. Gene Kogan, he is very known as an AI art pioneer because he's been fascinated with AI since he was a kid. He liked to make NPC players like play one against the other. And then he studied applied mathematics, so he learned machine learning in college in Columbia back in the 2000s. And he was doing applications in the creative field, at first for creative computing. But then when machine learning started to give interesting image results, he was one of the few people translating from academic papers to implementations within the creative coding world. And he started giving classes all over the world called Machine Learning for Artists to teach people who did not have such strong coding background or people who were just into the creative coding realms, how they could do interactive installations using machine learning. He went from audio recommendations and making instruments that learn to play themselves to making like visually interactive pieces that could recognize hand signs. And he has a big name on this scene on its own. And as we got closer, I end up in this world in which I'm surrounded by people talking about AI all the time. And I knew since the beginning that it was gonna have a horrible impact on artists, or at least
Might.
people.
Yeah.
Any
Oh,
new technology, right? Like that's the first
yeah,
reaction.
it's disruptive. It's disruptive, but like I could see it since I think it's beautiful. It's super powerful for artists, but also very disruptive. And this transition is very painful. So I realized early on, back then, it was GANs, generative adversarial networks. One
GANs.
needed thousands of similar
Yeah.
looking image in order to get AI, the GANs to create image that were beautiful, that were similar to the data set. And the issue with that is that the easiest way to get thousands of beautiful image with a similar content was just scraping artist content. So you could just, I did this experiment with storm chasing. So I found a hashtag, storm chasing, and then from this hashtag, you can find specific Instagram accounts. You scrape all their content, and then you train again, which for me was already a questioning of authorship, and also saying like this is clearly out of control because the copyright legislation we have is simply not adapted to this new world. And most artists, like people wouldn't even know what a data set is or what a database is there, but all their data is available. We're all contributing to the creation of this new models, of this new internet, of this gigantic AI models, but most people don't know what they.
Wow. So Vanessa, I mean, you touched on so many topics there that I think that are interesting. I mean, the big issue, we're all focused on AI and tech. Meanwhile, the arts, the sciences, the social sciences, the entire world is about to see this wave. And it feels like you've been sort of participating in that transformation and just watching it up close in a really, really fundamental fashion. I mean, what's your first thought here as to what this means? What happens from here?
So that's the thing. I love to think about things in terms of history and try to go deeper, what they mean. So spend a lot of time just reading the classics, reading Gilda Shaba by Douglas Hofstadter, Pamela McCurdy, Machines Who Think, trying to understand what is this lineage of AI? What is AI all about? And I feel very privileged that I was surrounded by open source developers. So the people who are really deep into building the tools is not only seeing, oh, what is the latest technique available, but trying to see what is possible to do and also what is a vision of how that changes the way we're capable of thinking about image. So of course, like AI has this disruptive impact. The example that I've done with the storm chasing for me was already critical in seeing, so to impress a wider audience, that's the easiest way. You make pretty image. But if you understand how these pretty images are made, you realize that this is trivial for what AI can do. So if you can already sell it as a marketing tool, it's because it's already too late in terms of where the tech is really heading and what sort of impact it will have. Imagine it's like using photograph to take pictures of paintings. Like, it's useful, and it works, it's useful, but it's kind of a reduced usage of what that medium is capable of. Like, there are so many different things that you can do with photographs that would just not be possible with paintings. Or like, paintings were used for scientific explorations, like the botanicals arts. They were all about trying to be as accurate as possible in the characteristics of a plant, but it's still like using photos for documentations and fast tracking or filming animals. Like, that opens so many new worlds that now we take for granted, and even more impacts in how that changes the way we understand history, the way we understand recordings, the way we understand the self. Once you grow up being able to take endless image of yourself and seeing a whole narrative of the self just by photos other people took of you. If you think historically how people, like, very few people could ever have their portraits, and what it meant to have a portrait that is available for future generations, that was their attempts of immortality. So it's like, it's so much beauty, I'm very passionate about um kind of the longer story arc. And about AI, it's like, man, I think we're really only starting to see, it's really early in realizing like what that changes in the role of the creator and how that relates to everything we've been doing forever, right?
It's so amazing to hear you talk, because I talk about AI coding the way you talk about AI art. In every field, the same, the scales are coming from people's eyes so they could see what's possible. One thing I saw in many of your art pieces was a blending of the physical and the virtual. And what role do you see, like, I mean, those training sets, but apart from training sets, what role do you see the physical art piece maintaining in this new world? Is it still there?
Yeah, so there are many sides to it. I don't think it's necessary for everybody doing interesting content in AI to be grounded in the physical. It's not like this is the only path forward. However, and that's also my personal choice of relating to the labor, the object, etc. I do think that if I make interesting objects and then I turn them into characters that live in a virtual world, that just makes the objects all the more valuable. So if we want to even think in terms of selling prices and monetization, etc., I do think there is something important to it. And I've been thinking more and more in terms of educational methodology, like how that's going to change in the long term, because it's like we already have the problem of, for example, new generations kids that just learn with screens all the time, and that gives them some consequences in terms of their attention span of what they do, etc. So I think embody AI, like being able to imagine the future with your hands. So that's one of the presentations I do with Little Martians, the idea that you have this little human shape in clay, like just this face, and you can customize it in clay. but it's still like it's just your hand in the most primitive, like it's a very ancient material. It's not primitive actually. It's like really high-end technology. If you think that ceramics, it's so strong that it can withstand going to space. It's useful for space exploration because it's such a high-end chemical process that it withstands extremely high temperatures. So it's one of the core technologies of humanity, and it's also about history. It's like what humans have been doing since ever. So it's a connection with your past. So you do things with your hand, but while trying to imagine this future, and then you have this like bodily connection as you're making a character that will live in another dimension. I like to think that that's what humans have always been doing.
Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead, Adarsh.
Yeah, there were
Yeah.
like three things that I really want to kind of, talk about here. First is sort of the arc that you laid out, Vanessa. If you really think about it, there's always this growth, like a conjoined growth of technology and art that has always happened. For example, even when the very first few cameras were invented, people started thinking about, hey, the exposure rate there is actually so high that if you try to take any fast object and an image of a fast object, you get this blurry image. But then artists started thinking about, hey, can we actually do something different here? What if we brought the room to become extremely dark, but then use the exposure rate with strobe lights, and that way you could capture a fast moving object. And guess what, this started in the art world, but then it actually then moved more on to like the scientific world, where people started using that to capture motors, right? Like electric motors and fix mistakes in them. So it's almost when the technology changes, art changes to go along with it. And so the story that you laid out in terms of GANs and how GANs, a general adversarial network, and then how that started your foray into image generation, and then that slowly evolved into you creating these sculptures and then creating a world around them. So that's one thought I was sort of grokking. And the other thing that it came to my mind is I feel like there's an economics shift that has happened, and people are either going to embark on it and realize its value or not, right? Like there's only two worlds of artists that are going to be there, and the economic shift has really happened for how we monetize art in some form. The physical space becomes the durables, right? Like, and it's the one that cannot be shared, whereas the virtual space is something that is like infinite and can be shared across different people. So when you create a character that lives in a virtual world, the person who holds the physical first copy of it essentially gets the fundamental right to say, hey, this is something that is indivisible. It's a good that no one else can have, and I have it. But guess what? You can come to the virtual world and enjoy its progress, but the physical world, it stays with me, right? And we've seen this value creation in the past in the movie sector, right? Like if you really think about it, people go for memorabilia and collectibles of Marvel characters, for example, where they would go buy the armor that they get for the first time. But then if you really think about it, there's like a digital representation that's really adding the value for it. It's the physical representation that gives them the indivisibility and like the true ownership satisfaction, right? Like, and that's where people are investing into it. And then the third thing that sort of struck me was economies of scale or agglomeration economies. When you did your GAN experiment and like sort of worked on top of it as the technology, you had to go accumulate data, and you had to do it like as a individual. Now what has happened is that sort of a scan of whatever content that is out there for foundational models is now a cost of computing problem, and therefore really big corporations have essentially gotten a mechanism and maybe even an edge to a certain extent, where when they are actually building out these foundational models that are huge, they're able to capture a large gamut of data and then cross-learn patterns from that, right? And to me, the way I sort of got that registered is, as an artist, now you would have to figure out how to kind of weave into that landscape effectively and at the same time create your own unique value proposition. That's where the scaling economics is something you got to work with, and I'm curious how you're thinking about that sort of intermingling, like with that large model, but at the same time bringing your own unique value to that large model.
Yeah. So what I see now, it's like at least how I see myself is shifting from a person who does a specific image to being the creator of a world. And to some extent, that goes back a lot to my background with novels, like with like writing books. So I grew up with my mother writing a series of A Boy Who Travels in Time, in which are like novels is um, the type of work that takes so long. So very few people could ever do it because it requires an extreme amount of concentration and also just time, and it's very hard to monetize. So it takes a long time for one to be able to do a whole series of books, and there is no guarantee that it's going to sell at all. It's really hard to sell novels. Like her way, like my mom's way of tricking that a little bit was with time travel. It's a niche, so it's easier to captivate than a romantic novel, like an open philosophical novel that is kind of experimental. It's really hard to sell it. So often these authors have to go to prizes and be part of a scene, etc. But most of the novels ever written, they don't even get read. There is very little feedback. But she would use important characters. So it's Einstein, Picasso, Agatha Christie, and Chaplin in Paris in 1905. So that helped sell a lot. So I have this background of learning like to edit books and debating the stories and seeing them created, etc. So it's really cool to go from that to, okay, so now I'm building a sci-fi world and I'm trying to create all these stories and all these characters and so many different layers. It's the physical layer of having the real objects that I can sell. It's making the exhibitions, presenting them in different contexts. I do immersive shows. There's so much different places of exploration. And in terms of the AI storytelling, I learned how to do movies. I learned how to do music with AI, in which I can have now the characters singing. I always loved musicals since I was a kid. I thought they were amazing, but that's the sort of thing that I would never be able to do before because I would need such a massive budget. And especially in a country like Brazil, it's unthinkable. You would have to be extremely, extremely wealthy in order to do a small one. And even then, it's like just we don't have enough of an industry. So you can hire someone that is going to do a top, like a really high end musical for you and like all the production lines. So there is a reason why these things would cluster. There is a reason why so many skilled people would go all the way to Hollywood to get their apprenticeship of working these high productions and meeting the people who are in the high productions so they can make movies. But now all of this is changing. So we have this phenomenon of AI filmmaking now spreading all over the world. And I participated in more than 50 international film festivals. And that has been a very interesting scene on its own that we could just dive into that. But I was like, but I'm already now walking beyond that because like now AI filmmaking for me is like established. Everybody's gonna run. It's gonna grow. But there is a new thing which is emergent storytelling, which is what I was presenting in Europe's. And that's where the cutting edge is. Like as an artist, what I really enjoy is the exploration. It's like what becomes possible now. And emergent storytelling is about you create a character, you write its system prompt, you create the aesthetics for that character, the voice of that character, where do they live? So it's like a character in a novel. So it's as if you could enter that world of that novel and now you can talk to them. And what happens? So we were doing an experiment, me and my husband, of creating automated stories. So that character would be able to output videos on their own. So I'm not doing any of the video editing. I'm not even choosing the image. We're just seeing what they do. The problem with that, with the current language models, with the current models we have, is that it gets repetitive really easy. So it starts repeating the lore. It just talks about the same stories, etc. So one thing that we can do is feedback systems. So I talk to it a little bit, I guide it. So it's still, I think we're still in a very manual moment in which you have to nurture your AIs. You can't just consider that once you add a few pages, you write a character, and now that character is gonna live consistently. It's like we're not there yet. So it's more like we're just now experimenting with memory systems. There are all these new techniques for memory. So that because the goal is that you have a character that is evolving. It's a character that I plan to be nurturing for years. So eventually will be a simulation that all sort of different people can talk to. But now we're already playing with multi-agent systems. So you can have several characters that share a lore, they share a universe, and they'll have memories with each other. And I can interact with all of them and see different responses.
Nessa, I'd love to pull back, and I want to come right back to this one in 1 second. But I think where you were a bit ago, we were talking about, there's this artists have always symbiotically exchanged ideas and traveled in groups and come together. And we're now in this world in which, instead of that happening kind of slowly and organically over time, it essentially happens instantly. Anytime you let your art free in the world, it's instantly connected to everything else in the world. And then I think, but I think then you're kind of moving to this where, instead of this random flat plane of art everywhere with loose connections, all of a sudden you've introduced this world concept. Do you see that maybe emerging as, do we end up with somehow clusters of these worlds and people
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
virally coming together? And
Yeah, so Marvel, that you just mentioned, I think that's a very clear scenario in which it's going to evolve as a simulation. And imagine that, like, people would enter the simulation with their friends, in which you're a character within the Marvel universe, and you can fork. So you interact with Iron Man, you and your friends interact with Iron Man, and then you make a fork of who Iron Man gets to be. And other people will be interacting with their own Iron Man. So the issue is, if that keeps going, eventually you have all these different Iron Mans, and they don't really talk to each other. So you need a kind of a unifying gravity. So there is actually a lot of experimentation still to be done, because what I see is, like, probably you would have forks of people saying, like, no, so now we have an inspired character in Iron Man, but this is our thing, and it becomes a niche, and it becomes something else at some point. And then you have, like, the even lawsuits and monetization on that. I was like, no, this is our IP, and it's like, these are the Iron Mans that we recognize as legitimate, and that's kind of the beauty, because it turns out that's what humans have been doing forever. You think religions and all the different sects is like, wait a second, it's like we unify through stories. We need that, and the forking, it's even necessary. It's like you need a little bit of competition. You need people pushing different directions to say, like, yeah. So the diversity, and going back to the union and property ownership models, who gets to benefit? Do you really want to put so much energy doing fan fiction on a universe that you cannot monetize? Maybe not.
There is actually a very clear connection in economics, and I'll explain
Mhm.
how that comes about. It goes back to the economics of niche that you spoke of, right? Like, if you're
Yeah.
creating a romantic novel, you're targeting a particular set of audience. And if you're creating like a Little Martian, you're targeting a different set of audience sometimes. But now, if you could bring in this concept of a cinematic universe, or even a concept of being able to bring multiverse in cinematic universe, what you end up really doing is you are building on your niche, but then you're cross-pollinating across niche. So if you're an Iron Man fan, for example, you're going to definitely go to the same set of movies that somebody else who's an X-Men fan is, but is in the same Marvel universe. So now what studios have really figured out is, yes, I can start with these niches, build each niche as a pillar, where I have Deadpool as like one character, or like Iron Man as like one character, and I build each one of them and build a character story around them in depth. But then I can also get the same thing to become a pop culture in some form by combining the characters together in like a common world, right? Like, and this is almost going back to what Rob was starting the question with, which is, if you think about the niches that each artist has to build, that is great. And then that niche comes back in some form into like a common ethos of art in some sense, where you could then build on your niche and then monetize for different people who are in the adjacent market. I'm curious to see if that is emerging already or if that is, like something that artists are thinking about.
I honestly, it's still a very small scene. The people who are working with emergent storytelling, it's a little bit spread. I see a lot of people working with AI filmmaking, so that's a booming scene on its own. Um, and within that, we have the people working towards niche, the people who are trying to do things more similar to existing Hollywood productions. So trying to match, like, look, you can do AI filmmaking that looks like a real movie, that looks like non-AI movies. So you have all sort of different approaches. But about what you're saying, like one aspect that I'm sure, especially Marvel and Disney, is going to be playing with, and we can play from an experimental AI point of view, is imagine that like you have an agent that is creating simulations and interacting with people, and then they're reading whatever is trending online, like within their niche, like what are people talking about? And they're going to be making content tailored for that niche. And the more people respond to it, like the more they will try to make content for within that attention span. Like they're going to try to maximize engagement, which can be a horrible crack thing. So as an artist, sometimes like I often find it interesting to play with these things when they're cutting edge, when it's like it just became possible and we're doing still kind of junky experimental, and then eventually the big players come and they'll do the crack version of it.
I'm trying to visualize how this happens. These super creatives, you're in a studio, there's ceramics, there's things on the wall, and now I've got a set of monitors and I got my headphones on and I'm in front of VS Code and I'm banging out, AI algorithms. What does it look like what is when this happens?
No, the process not there yet. I do have my fantasies about like being able to like be in my ceramic studio with my robot dog, and my robot dog is dreaming for me. And like I'm not me. I'm like a sci-fi version of myself with an AI privacy filter. So like I think that would be really cool. But right now, what I do is like I make the pieces and then I take photographs of them, or I do a 3D scan of them. And then I go to my computer and I spend hours in my computer um, just doing the music and improving the script writing, and then generating the image, and then perfecting the image on Photoshop, and then trying to come up with a storyboard, and then doing image to video. Honestly, I miss the more embodied part. I miss like I used to do murals, so I was out all day painting, which like maybe it's also a maturing phase. I was in my 20s making huge murals, so now I'm in my 30s, and it's a little bit exhausting to be the whole day just painting huge things. But I miss the embodied, like just I hope we're going in that direction in which it's less about me sitting here and using my mouse to make this image, and more like I want to be in a headset, just like giving directions with my body, like this way, that way, like this would be cool.
It's definitely going more towards the embodiment. And it actually goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? Like if you think about it, if you just zoom into these foundational models, they are meant to regress to the mean, right? Like what that means is whenever you're trying to create something, these models are almost designed to just produce the AI slop in the center. And as an artist, what you're really pushing is the boundary of the model just as much as the output that it comes out of it. When you give your seed prompt, which is when the starter thing that you talk about, where you evolve the character, where you're building on the character, really what you're doing is you're actually pushing what the model can answer in terms of its own capabilities. And when you speak about these characters being formed and them having a memory, it's really you now creating a history of your work in some form and letting the characters co-evolve in a universe. And it's an accumulation of your hard work in one sense, where individual characters are built and then you let them co-mingle together in a universe, and then you can use the individual characters' history and memory that you've pushed and nudged away from the mean. And that's value addition in itself, because you're now bringing the foundational model, which is like a generic item, which can produce a lot of AI slop if you let it be there, and you're moving it away from that AI slop into like a territory that is quite interesting and intriguing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's precisely what we're constantly pushing. Is we make this joke that whenever a new AI model comes along, at first we're like, wow, it can do all these things, it's so intelligent. And then after a while interacting with it, you're like, I'm bored. It's like, okay, I get it. So repetitive. It's like you just adapt to a new standard. And every time you adapt to a new standard, you need to push it, you know? And to some extent, again, it's like it's not even just about AI. I think that's normal of any relationship, right? There is this moment of you meet someone new and you are so impressed and enamored, and then you learn about their little quirks and faults, etc. And then you think twice. And then if you really want to build a relationship, it's all about like working with these constraints, trying to make something new together.
I've been active down at Caltech, and there's a project at Caltech that is an image-based project around iNaturalist, which is a global community of naturalists working to identify, plants, animals, flora and fauna. It's a super interesting example of the sort of giant community that's formed around a topic, and they're all contributing, and it works because the community they have. Essentially, the community is responsible for labeling and tagging and discovering new things, and it's a super interesting world. I'm trying to like think about the analogy with these art worlds you're creating, where you have these big groups that could come behind a single passion.
Yeah. For Little Martians, one thing that I'm also very excited is the educational aspect of it. So I don't know if you know the premise of the universe. The idea is they
No,
start as these seeds, like we have these heads, like this is one of them. So these are some of the old characters. And at first, I was thinking just elongated humans, just the head and no body. So it's a bit the archetype of future humans, right? But then I started imagining that these heads are actually seeds. So instead of sending, like in a far, far future, instead of sending a spaceship with a bunch of humans to another planet, so that spaceship will have all these humans that are very fragile trying to survive in a different environment, we send these ceramic heads, and ceramics again is a material that can withstand high, like extremely high temperatures. And inside, what you have is life forms that are capable. This is like a seed that tries to grow with whatever are the available resources. So they have the knowledge of all the species from Earth. So they can do photosynthesis, they can do chemosynthesis, they can do radiosynthesis, and also transform radiation into a form of energy. And they try to multiply and create the groundings for new life forms to emerge. So and then many of these characters, they look like plants with humanoids, with fungi, and they will be hybrids. And the idea is that they can control their bodies to a much deeper level that we can. So we are discovering nowadays with computational biology, especially Michael Levin's research is one of the thinkers that I've been most fascinated with, that cells are capable, well, they communicate through biological signals, and if you change the voltage of these signals, you change what the cells are capable of doing. And it would be possible just by having different commands that cells would do wildly different things that they do now. It's as if our cells would lose capacity. An embryo, when they're just starting, like you start with just a few, or like one cell reproducing, and that one cell is capable of taking any shape, right? It's gonna make all your organs. It's gonna have and so most of our cells lose that capability. So imagine creatures that have the knowledge of all species on Earth and are capable of reorganizing their bodies according to what is the need. And then they would adapt to local environments and try to grow life as much as possible. However, they are immigrants from Earth. And as immigrants, they carry the memory, the biological and cultural legacy from Earth. So they maintain simulations about Earth. So it's as if they're our future descendants in the stars. And when we look at the stars, we're already looking at this future of life. And they care for us as we care for our ancestors. You care for a lineage. As a Brazilian, moving out of Brazil, that just makes me love so many aspects of Brazil all the way more. It's like it touches there is something familiar. You want to preserve it, you want to expand it, but as an immigrant, you also become something else. You merge with whatever is available. So that's one of my core inspirations. And from the scientific storytelling point of view, it's also very fun to do the exercise of, for example, I always mention Enceladus. It's a tiny moon of Saturn, or maybe the second biggest moon, but it's a moon of Saturn that we know it's one of the spaces, one of the bodies in the solar planet that is most likely to nurture life as we know on Earth, because it has hydro vents, it has a frozen ocean, it has water, it has all these characteristics that we know that on Earth it's suitable environment for life. So it's interesting to think how we can use all the data we have about Enceladus, all the data we have about species on Earth and how they survive in this sort of extreme environment, and then use that as source material for my characters, for my AI characters that have all these premise, and I can give the aesthetic taste and the guidance, and then I put it all together and create an environment in which I'm not just the one designing the whole story. I'm also using the AI models as co-creators to say okay, so within these constraints, within this premise, what happens? Tell me, what happens in Enceladus? And that can be fascinating even for us to learn. Simulations are all the more important for us to see what is possible there. And I hope also to make people a little bit less afraid with this idea that a space exploration means abandoning Earth. It's no, the more we know, the better. So if we knew how life could ever thrive in a place like Mars or Enceladus or elsewhere, we should be able to nurture life on Earth better.
So Vanessa, as we kind of get to wrap up here, I'd love to find out, I guess, how do people learn more about what you're doing? And, if somebody wanted to actually get involved, what would they do?
Yes. So I have a website called littlemartians.world. One can also interact with them on eden.art, which is a platform that Jean built. It's a platform for creative AI agents. So it's really fortunate that we get to design the tools while experimenting with what is possible to do with storytelling. So otherwise, one can follow me on social media, VA2Rosa on Instagram and Twitter. I still use most Instagram, but otherwise, one can also send me emails, va2rosa@littlemartians.world.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been it's been fascinating. It's been mind exploring, and just love to see a new topic.
Of course, I'll share with you my movie, and also I'll just put it's unlisted because it's still screening through film festivals. But my latest movie is 10 minutes long, and I think it shows a lot of what the universe is about.
Thank you, Vanessa. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe for more such content.